All right, so this is the O2R, and this is the O2R room at SAE in New York. So you can see here, it's a pretty sparse room. There's not a whole lot going on in here. The main thing in here is just the O2R console. This is it right here. We got a couple of monitor speakers here and the O2R here. So this room is mostly for you to record or mix in. This O2R here, we have 16 channels for recording, and you can play back and mix 24 channels at the same time with this console. That's how we have it set up at SAE in New York. So I can't really get any closer here, so what I want to do is I'm going to use this here to show you a little close-up of the O2R, and this is just a press shot of it, but it gives us a really good idea of what we're dealing with here, and it's also nice and big, and we can scroll around in it, look around, and like this, see what's going on. So this is an overview of the O2R right here, just kind of like scrolling over it. And mostly we're going to be dealing with our notes this week, and when you get into school, getting your hands on with it. So when we're in the studio this week, when we're in school, you're going to be working in the O2R and in the Audient rooms, or working on your projects. Those are the main things we're going to be working on this week. And again, we'll do the O2R kind of like what we did with the Audient. We're going to start off by mixing some stuff, and then we're going to go into recording some stuff. And if you haven't done recording in the Audient yet, we need to get on top of that and make sure you're getting in there to do some recording in there. So let's just do an overview of what's going on with the O2R. So the O2R is a digital console, and why it's famous is because it has really flexible routing. It's not really famous because of the sound. It's just got like a very digital, flat sound, which is fine, but it's not terribly interesting. It's just clean and flat. The reason why it's famous is not because of the sound, it's because of the flexible routing. You can save and recall the overall console settings as scenes, and it's got onboard effects like reverb and delay and stuff, and you can also save presets for these. And you can save everything all together, and that's what the scenes are. The scenes include your effects, they include your channel strip settings, they include your EQs, all that kind of stuff is in there, and that's one of the reasons why it's super famous. We're going to talk about that in more detail here in a few minutes. The Yamaha O2R has motorized faders. It's got 24 motorized faders, and these can be paired together for stereo tracks, and they can also be grouped together in groups that are larger than a pair. The default I/O on the O2R is 16 XLR inputs and 24 line inputs, and there's overlap there. So the first 16 channels of inputs are XLR or line inputs. They cannot be both at the same time. You're either using the XLR input or you're using the line input path. And then the last 8 inputs are line inputs only. Now, this is the default I/O, which means that just straight out of the box, this is what you're getting. But this can be expanded to more inputs and more outputs as well. It's got 24 direct outs, so every channel that you can record in has its own direct out. And as I mentioned before, it's a clean sound, but it's sterile and just bleh, meh kind of sound, which is not necessarily bad, but it's not interesting either. So here's the overview of the O2R. It's the same as this picture right here. This one here, you can see I've got boxes around certain parts of it. Number 1 up here, number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. And 15 has various parts within it. So we're going to take a minute to just kind of break all this stuff down real quick. And I'm going to go pretty quick through this because it's in your notes, and you can go back and we can talk about it in Zoom. This is not really, the O2R is not great on Twitch because there's not a whole lot to do. It's better to talk about it and to go over it in parts more on Zoom than on Twitch, but we're just doing this so I can get a nice recording of this. So number 1 is the meter bridge. That's this part up here that shows you all your tracks, all your channels, the internal channels of the O2R metering. And then you've got your number 2 here is your AD inputs. That's analog to digital inputs. And you can see each one of these has a gain knob here. And you can see the way these look. These 16 here, They have a couple buttons going on. They've got a 48 volt. You can turn the condenser mic for a condenser mic, phantom power on and off. You've got a pad here, and down here you've got an insert for these as well, and you've got your, of course, your gain here. And that's these first 16. The reason why these look different from these last 8 over here is because, remember, these first 16 can be XLR or line input. And the way you switch between those is like you do on like a Mackie board or something like that, where if you plug in the line input, it's going to override the XLR input. What's up, Charlies? How you doing, man? So let me just get him in here real quick. There we are. These last 8 inputs here, 17 through 24, these are just have gain knobs on them because these are just line inputs only. There's no preamp on these, and there's no like XLR input for these. But you can have more than 16 XLR inputs on the O2R, which we'll talk about how to do that later. Number 3 over here is our input section. It's kind of our, not our input section, it's our kind of like control section, what we're listening to here. Let me just go, here we go. Oops. Hold on, let me get that back to 0. There we go. There we go. So it's our monitor source selection area. So if we go in here, let me zoom in. Actually, use this one here. I'll zoom in on this one so I don't have to keep. There you go. We're looking at this area right here, and up top we've got our studio room and then our control room here. So the studio room is what our musicians are listening to, and we can choose what they are going to hear. So if you want them to hear exactly what you're hearing, you can push the control room button. If you're listening, they can hear the stereo input, which is like, for example, if you're recording out to a 2-track and they want to monitor in the studio, you can do that with the stereo button here. And then aux 7 and 8 for your headphone mixes. The O2R is different from the Audient in that it does not have dedicated headphone auxes. Remember, the Audient has the foldback aux channels. This one does not have that. It's just got auxes 7 and 8. Then down here, you've got your solo clear button. So if you've got anything soloed somewhere on the board, you can just hit that clear button and it will unsolo it. And so everything will be heard again. And then down here, we've got our control room monitor section. There's a whole bunch of choices here. The main one is stereo right here. That's what you're going to be listening to 98% of the time. And then you have a Sign 1 and a Sign 2 at SAE. We have that set up as aux 7 and aux 8. But we're going to talk about that more in a few days once we start talking about headphone mixes and stuff like that. Then you also have a surround button down here, surround for the bus or the slots. This is something you're not going to have to worry about at SAE because we do not have that set up for surround mixing. But basically, if you have a special card in the back for surround sound, then you would use the slot button. Or if you're just going out of your bus outs, your auxes outs, then you can use that. And that's like for the Omni out section there. What is up, Amir? How you doing, man? Great, good to see you. All right, and then we have our levels down here. These knobs here are for the levels. This is our surround sound monitor level, and this is our control room level. And down here, you've got dimmer and talkback. The talkback mic on here is up here, and this is where you set up your talkback level. And then down here is the button you press in order to actually talk back. All right, number 4 is our machine control and transport. And this is not something you're going to use very often at SAE, just because we do have it set up for this, but most people don't use it for this. You can if you wanted to. So if you wanted to use it all the time, you could use it all the time. But this is just start and stop and record into Pro Tools. So, and this is like some memory locations. So you can set up memory locations in your in the O2R. Or in your DAW, you can have things connected there. Down here is something you're going to be using all the time. This is our data wheel and navigation area. So you got these buttons here, these arrow buttons here, and increase and decrease, and then enter key down here in the navigation wheel. And that's going to control stuff on our screen right here. This is not a touch screen, so we need to use these navigation buttons down here to navigate around that screen over here. Next, you've got your master fader. That's this part right here. That includes all this right here. The master fader is this. Does not include this layer section up here. More about that right now, actually. So the layer section here is for different layers. Now what the layers are for, let's go ahead and open up this PowerPoint here, because it has a great picture of this, and it goes over all this stuff, and so we're gonna come back and talk about it. We're just gonna do it. We're just doing a general overview right now. But the layer, let's see, where is it in here? Here we go. So the O2R has 24 faders on it. You can see these faders are right here, but it actually has 56 channels. So the way we navigate between all those different channels is using the layer buttons, and the layer buttons are just selecting what these channel strips are controlling. So each one of these channel strips has a fader on it. It's got an on-off switch, which is like your mute button. It's got a solo switch, which solos that channel out. You've got a select button, so you can select that channel. And you've got an auto button for automation if you want to read and write automation. Again, we're not really going to do that much in this class here. And then you have this encoder knob up here, which can be panning, or it can be aux send amount. I usually use it for panning. And then all of these channels are all exactly the same. So we have our fader strip here, our on-off switch here, solo button, select button, automation, and then the encoder knob for all the different channels. For all these different faders here. And these can control every single channel in the O2R. But the way we get it to control those different channels is by using the layers select area here. So it looks like this if you're looking at it like how it actually is. You got layers 1 through 24, then you got layers 25 through 48, sorry, channels 1 through 24, channels 25 through 48. Then you have 49 through 56, aux sends, bus outs, and that's on the master layer. And then you've got the remote layer. So over here is what it looks like up close, 1 through 24, 25 through 48, master and remote. And that's just different things here, and it kind of shows it right here. So on layer 1 through 24, it's got your input channels 1 through 24. Then layer 25 through 48 has input channels 25 through 48. Those are very self-explanatory. I hope you don't have any kind of trouble understanding what those are about. But then you get your master layer, and the master layer contains the remainder input channels, and then it also contains our aux send masters, and then it contains our bus out masters. And then you've got a remote layer, and this depends on the selected target, which, for example, it's using, this is so you can control Logic, Pro Tools, or Ableton Live, I guess. I've never tried to do it with Ableton Live, but you can definitely set it up for Logic or Pro Tools to control the faders on those programs. So that's what the layer buttons do, and that's also actually what all these different channels are doing as well. So if I go back here and I look at this one here, we just talked about number 8, and we just talked about number 7 and number 8. Number 9 is over here. It's our display control section, this area up here. And this kind of brings us to something else I want to point out on the O2R, and this kind of helped me when I was learning about the O2R and how to use it, is that the buttons have different kind of orientation. You've got your regular square buttons like this, and you have buttons on their sides that look like diamonds. These buttons that are on their sides, these squares on their sides that look like diamonds, this is going to change the screen, what you're looking at on the screen. These buttons that are set up as normal squares are going to navigate to different parts on that screen. So if I want to look at my, for example, if I want to look at my channel routing, I push the routing display button here, and then now it's going to show me all my routing, and I can change the routings for selected channels right in here. If I wanted to look at my compressors or gates for different channels, I can push this display button right here and it will navigate to the dynamics section. Same thing with my EQ right here. This display button would navigate to my EQ section for my selected track. So I can see that really easily. Over here, we've got a display for the aux select, we've got a display for the encoder mode, and a display for the effects plugins section. So if I wanted to see what's going on with my effects plugins, that's what I can do with that right there. All right. Cool. What am I? Yeah, it's a display for each thing. My mouse just stopped working. Hold on 1 second. Let me get someone to plug that in real quick. Hold on. Oh, wait, are you gonna? No, I think I need to plug this in to my computer. Do I have a cable here? I do have a cable right here. There we go. Perfect. Let me just plug this in. Wireless things are great unless they do not have a display to show you their battery level, and then they are less than optimal. Is that going to work? It's going to work. There we go. All right. Okay, so yeah, so that's our display button for each section. And then up here, this display access area has a whole bunch of different things that you can get into inside of the Yamaha. Really, you got to think about the Yamaha O2R as a computer. It's basically a computer that's just dedicated to mixing. So if you think about it like a computer, and computers can do all sorts of different stuff, and they have a monitor that shows you all the different things that you're using on a computer, then you'll be a lot closer to being comfortable with the O2R because it's just a computer. And so you have to go into the computer and you have to change parameters within the computer, just like you would on your phone, just like you would on your iPad, just like you would on your laptop. It's exactly the same. It's just this one is dedicated to mixing. That's the only difference. So just because of that, or just like with everything else, you have different windows that you can navigate to change things. And so you can change this stuff here is for changing different parameters within the mixer. Now, most of the time, you probably don't really want to change too much. That's this right here. You don't want to change too much on it unless you know what you're doing, because there's a lot of different people using Yamaha O2R at SAE, and if you start changing things around, it can start to really kind of mess with stuff. All right, so that's our display control, and in the notes you can see here I've got a little diagram here. This one changes the display screen, and this one selects or changes something on the screen. Sometimes with certain parameters, when you click on like comp on or gate on, it will automatically change your screen to show you the dynamics page. So it will switch your screen with some of these squares, not all of them, but some of them. And you really have to kind of just get used to which ones will do that. It's just a matter of using it and getting used to it. All right, so number 10 here is our aux control selector. This works together with number 11 and 12. That's our aux control selector here. And so what this does is, if we're using number 11 and 12 are the encoder mode and the fader mode down here. So with the encoder mode, that's these across the top. And you can see with my encoder mode, just zoom in a little bit here, it's a little bit fuzzy, but this one says pan, this one says aux, this one says assign 1 and assign 2, which we have set up to be auxes 7 and 8. But with our pan selected, that means that these encoders down here across the top of each channel strip are going to be for panning that channel. So if I go to channel 10 right here, and I say I want to pan it, then I have to make sure that my encoder mode is set to pan, and then I can turn the knob and it will pan it. If I wanted to though, I could have it so my encoder knobs here are for my aux channels, for my aux send amount. How much do I want to send to an aux for like more reverb or delay or something like that? So what I could do is I could say, okay, on channel 10, I want to send it to my aux1, which has maybe a reverb on it. So what I would do is I would go in here and I would set this to aux mode, make sure this says aux number 1, and then I can turn it and it will adjust the level for the aux send number 1. And you would do that for each one of these here. It might sound a little bit confusing at first. Some of you might be going, oh, that's pretty cool. Some of you might going, huh? Right? If you're doing that, it's totally fine. Like I said, I'm just going over this quickly right now. Some of this stuff you just have to put your hands on it to really understand it. Same thing with our fader mode. The fader mode, each one of these faders down here can actually have two different modes. It can either be in fader mode where it's controlling the level of the channel, or it can be in aux send mode, which is controlling the level of the aux send. Now, this is how I predominantly use the O2R. I like to use my aux sends from my faders. It helps because it's a bigger throw and it works pretty well. Also, I just like to see everything lined up right there in front of me so I can see what's going on. With the encoders, you don't really know what every single one is doing. You can pull it up on a screen to see what they're all doing. With the encoder mode, you can display and you can show where the encoders are, but I actually like to see it on my faders. So what I would do is I would go to fader mode, and if I want to send my aux levels or set my aux levels, I would change this to aux, and then I would go to aux select here, and I would select which aux send I'm controlling. And then whenever I use the fader, it's going to move it to that aux send. Now, the really cool thing about all this is that it works really well because of the motorized faders. All of these can change and switch to different positions when you change from aux mode to fader mode. So when you're in fader mode, they'll show you the faders. When you switch to aux mode, they'll move with a click sound, and they'll change you and show you your auxes. So that's why that actually works so well. 11A is just the encoder mode, and then number 12 is the fader mode, selector, fader level, aux is send amount. Number 13 here is your effects. It's right down here. And you have different buttons for here. You've got your internal effects, plugins, and channel inserts. The internal effects, there are 4 different internal effects that are built into it. You have 4 different effects slots, and they can be reverbs, delays. You could even have it for choruses and stuff like that. But really the main ones you're going to use are reverbs and delays, because these are like send effects. You can also have some external plugins on here and some other things like that. There's not that many of them, but there are a few. Waves makes a way to have external plugins on your O2R, for example. And you have channel inserts here, and that's going to be, for example, like your dynamics over here and your EQ here. You're not going to use the dynamics and the EQ as send effects. That's not how you use compressors or EQs. You'd use them as insert effects. And so there's another way you can kind of see what's going on right down here. You got 1, 2, 3, 4 button right here. That's for your 4 different effects. Like I said, there's 4 different effect slots inside the O2R. All right, this here, number 14, is your display. This is not a touch screen. Not a touch screen. It says it here in the notes, so it must be true. Not a touch screen. Don't try to touch it. You're going to be disappointed. Number 15, the selected channel area. That's over here in the corner, and this has to do with what channel you have selected. Now let's just look down here and see this, these blue select buttons for every single channel. These blue select buttons, what happens is when you push that on a channel, it's gonna basically select that channel. So now this whole section over here, see where it says selected channel? This whole section here is going to be controlling that channel. So if you want to put an EQ onto a track or put a compressor onto a track, you'd hit the select button for the channel you want to put it on, and then you just apply your changes here. And then you can also do routing, stuff like that, and also panning over here. Here's another place to do panning with this knob right here. Although again, I usually just do my panning from my encoders on each track. It's pretty easy. This little display right here does show you your pan for each channel. And this knob up here, well, not knob, it's like a joystick controller. This joystick controller thing will allow you to do surround sound panning if you have a surround sound room. And here's our routing section for our buses 1 through 8. If you're recording into Pro Tools, remember on the Audient, to record into Pro Tools, you need to use the routing matrix. And the routing matrix had buttons with numbers. This one also has buttons with numbers, but you do not have to use a routing matrix on this one because this is what we call direct out. So every channel just goes directly from that channel into Pro Tools. And the way we have it set up at SAE is that it goes directly into the same channel input and output. So for example, if I'm coming into channel 10 with my vocal, I would just hit the direct button right here, turn off my stereo button so it's no longer going to my stereo mix that I'm listening to, hit the direct button, and now it's going to be going into channel 10 in Pro Tools, on the input 10 in Pro Tools, and then I just set that up on a channel, and then I set the output to going back to channel 10, and it's going to get output to come back to channel 10, but that's going to actually be channel 35 on here. It gets a little bit confusing if you're thinking about the numbers as they actually are, but if you just kind of generalize stuff in your head, it's actually not that difficult. So again, we're going to come back and talk about all that stuff in detail. Then we have our user-defined keys over here. I never use these for anything. If you want to dig deeper into them, talk to me and we can talk about it, but it's more advanced and I don't really want to get into it too much. Also, I don't really encourage people to use them at SAE just because there's so many people who are using stuff at SAE, and if you use it and you start relying on something, it might get erased and there's nothing you can really do about it. And then finally over here is our scene memory. This is basically your presets for the board. So if I wanted to have a mix that I'm working on, I want to save that mix so I can work on it again tomorrow, then I can save it into a scene memory. When you click the display button, it will show you a list on the display. It'll show you a list of all your scenes that are being used. I believe there are 128 of them. I could be wrong about that. It's been a while since I've actually looked at how many there are. Or sorry, I believe there are, 99 of them. So like basically 100, including 00. Now for SAE, our zeroing out the board, returning the board to its default state. That is just 00. You just go navigate to 00 and hit recall, and it will just bring everything back at once. You can't overwrite it easily, but you can overwrite it. So don't try to overwrite it. If you ever get into a point where it's like, are you sure you want to overwrite this? Just say no for now, all right, until you really know what you're doing. Cool. So I think that's a good little overview of stuff. Yep. And the next part here is just going to talk about our 4 layers. This is in the notes here. The 4 layers are layers that select what channel the strips are controlling. The channel strips are control. So you have layer 1 through 24 and 25 through 48, and then you get your master, which is control channels 49 through 56, aux masters 1 through 8, and buses 1 through 8. Then you have your remote section, again, that controls your DAW. So number 7, here, this part, wait, where is it down here? Yep. This part here is controlling your board, the layer for the whole everything. So what I mean by that, that's what in the notes, what it means by that is that, let me just move these over a little bit so we can see them. Oh, that's not gonna work. Okay. So I got them here so you can basically see both things at the same time. Let me just go with this, put this over. Awesome. Okay. So number 7, which is this part down here, this layer control, controls the layers for the entire console. Now what I mean by this is that these meter board, the meter bridge across the top, that can actually be disconnected to show you different things from what you're actually working on down here on the bottom. And that's really useful for if you're working with some EQs, but you want to check levels somewhere else. You want to be looking at some different levels, but you want to be messing with your EQs. You could have your EQ, let's say your EQ is on channel 32, which would be layer 25 through 48. So if you wanted to change that level on number 32, you'd have your layer set for 25 through 48. But let's say you want to be monitoring, looking at your input, you can have your input path up here be set to 1 through 24. So you need to make sure about that setting. But so if I hit the layers button, it's going to change everything. It's going to change both my meter bridge and the channels down here. If I just hit up here in the top, and it's hard to see, but it does say 1 through 24, 25 through 48, master and remote. If I hit the button up here, it's only going to change what I'm looking at in my meter bridge. It's not going to change the faders down at the bottom. So that's, if you want to get into that, that's how that works there. You're not always going to change, but it's nice to have it. And Swift says, how many layers are on the O2R? There are 4 layers. It's not super complicated, just 4 layers, 1 through 24, 25 through 48, and master layer and remote layer. But you're not going to be using the remote layer very often. You're only going to hear me talk about that when I'm just talking about like how many layers it has. But in general, for like, you know, most of this week, we're going to be talking about layers 1 through 24, 25 through 48, and remote. I mean, in master, not remote. All right, now your meter bridge does have 3 settings: pre-EQ, pre-fader, and post-fader. The pre-EQ setting is best for level setting, for recording, and the post-fader is best for mixing. All right, a little bit of notes here about the O2R display. Select what you want to look at by pressing the diamond button, diamond button. Navigate around the display by using the arrow keys, and number 5, that's down here in the corner. Use the F1 through F4 buttons below the screen for tab select. That's these down here. And then using encoder knobs 1 through 4 to control things on the screen. So you can use these here. Or you can navigate using all this stuff over here, and you can change the amount, the setting using the data wheel over here. It does okay. Sometimes because it's got like the little clicks in it, sometimes it kind of gets a little bit wonky, but we try to clean it and keep it up, you know, keep it so it's good. But you can also use these encoder knobs. I find it a little bit confusing because I don't really use the O2R so much anymore. I did use it for a couple of years when I was in school in London. We had one, and that was back in 1997. So we had it really early on before a lot of people had the O2R, and I learned how to use it. And the way I learned how to use it was really just the guy, the head of the studio, was just like, here's the manual, here's the O2R, go. And I was just like, all right, cool. And I just sat there with the manual and learned it. All right, so far I feel like things haven't been too crazy confusing, and I don't want to spend too much time on what I'm about to talk about here because I don't want it to get too crazy and confusing, but I do want to go over it here, and that's how the channels and everything line up, because we have 24 inputs, but we have 56 channels. Now, one thing I need to tell you about is that the O2R has, let's see, does it talk about it in here? I think it does, but I don't know where. Here we go. On the back section of the O2R, we have these slots. What is up, Duan? How you doing? Duan, please be aware I am marking you late half an hour because you're after 10 o'clock. So just keep in mind, you do have some time to make up just because you've been late quite a bit. Anyway, so we have the slot inputs here, and these can have different cards that you can put into them. So for example, you could have 4 more XLR outputs, or you could have 16 ADAT IOs, and that's what we have set up at school. You could also have 8 more 1/4 inch inputs. So you have options about what you like, what extra additions you can make to the O2R. And that's what we have set up here. So our monitor section is all coming through the ADAT digital and a few of the 1/4 inch inputs. the input part going to the computer, recording into the multi-track recorder, is all just digital, 16 digital here. So let's get into this and show how this works here. So remember, we've got 16 XLR or line inputs and then 8 line only. So there's 24 line inputs and there's 16 XLR inputs. If you have both XLR and 1/4 inch plugged in, the 1/4 inch will be the input signal, the XLR will be ignored. So that's how you have it set up like that. Remember, in the Audient, you push that button and it flips between your XLR or your line input. On the O2R, they don't have it set up like that. It's just you plug it in. If you have the XLR plugged in by itself, it's going to be an XLR signal. If you have a 1/4 inch plugged in, even if you have the XLR plugged in, it's going to be the 1/4 inch signal. At SAE, we only have XLR cables plugged into channels 1 through 16 only. That's all we have, so it's your XLRs. Now, these have to route to your channels on the O2R, and the way we have it set up, because remember, and this is where people start to get confused, is that it's a computer. So I can route anything to anything. So for example, if we look at here, let me just pull up Pro Tools real quick and give you an example. While Pro Tools is loading up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the tracks into an order, and then I'm going to have all my inputs be for the order, but then I'm going to flip it around so it no longer, they're out of order here. That's what I'm going to do real quick, just to show you as an example of how this works. As soon as this initializes my controllers. Hey look, it's almost the same size circle. Cool. Still initializing my controllers. Why are you taking so long to initialize controllers? There are no controller Pro Tools. Okay, so I'm going to call this one O2R input overview. And I'm going to go down here my I/O settings, and I'm going to use my C24 Control 24 mix. I'm going to use that right there. Boom. I don't have a Control 24. It's just I have this thing in here, so I can set up like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here. I'm going to make 10 tracks mono, and I'm going to turn on my track numbers so you can see the track numbers. There we go. So you can see down here it has a track number, and I can actually here I'll just do this. I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. See, like this. There we go. So I have 10 tracks, 10 channels, and actually I can. Here, let's turn that track number off because I think it's gonna. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I just have 1 through 10 down here. Now, on here, I only have 8 here. Well, here, let me just get rid of the extra 2. Okay, so I have 8. Now, it doesn't matter what order I have these in up here. So for example, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I could have input number 7 go into channel number 3. See how that works in Pro Tools. So I've got this channel number 3 here. I can have input number 7 going to channel number 3. I can have input number 5 here. I could have input track 5. I could have input I could have input number 1 going to 5. You know, and I could have number 5 going to number 1. See how this works out? And then 7. I could have number 7 be number 3. So I can basically have it set so any input goes into any channel down here. It doesn't really matter what I have set up. It's Pro Tools. It's a computer, and I can have it set up. And usually, I think it's really easy to understand on Pro Tools for whatever reason, because it's a computer and we're just used to being able to do stuff like this on a computer. But because the O2R is a mixer, sometimes it's harder for people to wrap their head around the fact that we can do the same thing. It's also a little bit more difficult to find the window that does this. So basically what the R2 does, the R2, what's the R2? I don't know what the R2 is. You mean the O2R? And then Stavro says, oh, I see, yep. So it's like the same type of thing. So it doesn't matter. Yeah, the O2R. O2R, not the R2. O2R. You'll get there, Swift. So, but yeah, that's basically what the O2R is doing. It's just, basically the O2R is just this window on Pro Tools in a box. That's really what the O2R is. So, I have my physical channels here, but inside the O2R I can have any input going into different channels. And so that's what we're showing here on this right here. So I got my input path, my monitor path, and all this stuff. So here's my different layers. I've got the layers 1 through 24 is channels 1 through 24. And I've got my monitor path is layer 25 through 48, which is channels 25 through 48. Then I got my master layer here, which is 49 through 56 on 1 through 8, and then 9 through 16 is my aux masters, and then my bus masters are on 17 through 24. So most of that's actually pretty easy to see if we look over here. Let me just make this longer. If we look over here, we can see each one of the faders on each channel strip has the white numbers here are 1 through 24. So it's easy to see channels 1 through 24. But it has gray numbers beneath it that say 25 through 48, and then it says 49 through 56 like this. They have labels on here. These labels are just to make life a bit easier for you. They do not have the different labels up top. They only have them down here on the bottom to make your life a bit easier. But let's see how the physical inputs are set up on here. The physical inputs are 1 through 24 analog. Physical inputs, the analog inputs, channels 1 through 24 on our SAE O2R. Now, I'm going to stop right here for just a second and just point out that this is how ours is set up at SAE. It's really, really important to understand that. This is not a universal setup. This is how we have it set up. And you can change this, just like I can go into Pro Tools and I can change this and I could set this up and I could say, okay, this is how my studio is set up. I've got channel input number 5 is going to channel 1, and input number 2 is going to channel 2, and input number 7 is going to channel 3. And I could have this be my setup if I wanted to. Same thing with the O2R, we can have a default setup. So the way we have this set up, make this a little bit bigger here, is that physical inputs 1 through 16 are coming into channels 1 through 16. Ignore this expansion S1 right now. Physical inputs 17 through 24, that's our quarter-inch inputs, are not coming into channels 17 through 24. They're coming into channels 41 through 48, because we want to have those for the input path at SAE, or for the monitor path at SAE. And I'm going to explain that in just a second. Okay, now, our card slot in the back, the one that has our digital inputs, that card slot is actually coming into channels 25 through 40 right here, 25 through 40. And then so 25 through 48 is our monitor path. And then 1 through 24, but only the first 16 channels are the input path. So at SAE in New York, you can only record 16 channels at the same time because we only have it set up and the O2R set up like that. but you can mix 24 channels at the same time. And that's how that's all set up. This stuff down here is actually for the Sapphire outputs, and I need to change this because actually we're no longer using the Sapphire. So this part down here you can just kind of ignore. I don't know if I can't really do anything to this, but here I can do it right here. I can say, oh wait, it's not gonna, oh wait, here, can I mark it? I can mark it up, there we go. I can go through and I can make a box like this. I can make a shape. Oh, there you go. This stuff here is no longer, there we go. Yeah, Swift, I know, it's confusing. It is confusing. I get it. I agree, it's confusing. For the most part, you don't have to worry about how it's cabled up in the back because you're not cabling it up. But the reason why I'm talking about this is because I want you to understand how it works and what you can do, what potential stuff you have. But essentially, actually what I should do is I should upload this one here. I'm gonna save this, and I'll upload this one to Canvas right now. As a matter of fact, my Canvas. Here's my Canvas. And turn this one off, unpublish. And I'll remove it out of here. And then I'll go into here. Hold on, let me just do this real quick, y'all, while I'm thinking about it here. And actually, I'm gonna pause the recording here because we're pretty much done for this section here.